try to play a 10-minute game. E4, let's continue with C5, the Sicilian. Now, bishop C4 is one of those moves you see a lot as a more of a beginner intermediate level. But the reason that bishop C4 is not considered accurate is because bishop can be blunted with E6, and later after D5 can get hit. And we go knight f6, so we have a nice position. And e5 already a blunder because the queen can go out here, forking the king and the pawn. So go with this idea, very common idea. Here we can either take with the queen or the knight. If we want to just play an endgame, we can play queen takes. Probably I would play queen takes by playing a regular game and not recording this. But I can also go knight takes, hitting the bishop. The bishop could drop back. But let's keep it kind of clean. Take with the queen. And we're trading off into an endgame where we're simply up a pawn. Now we can trade or not. I vote to trade. Quickly pushing d5, as I mentioned before, was the vulnerability of putting that bishop on c4. Now bishop b5, white is trying to go knight e5. One simple move to stop this is just bishop d7. And after bishop takes, you can either take with the bishop or the pawn. And both are probably okay. But pawn takes is my preference here because it brings a pawn closer to the center. Here we have c5, knight b3, here we can play bishop d6 and just castle. Bishop g5 is a move that attacks our knight, so we can drive this knight into the position attacking the bishop. I could have also castled, but I see no reason not to play this move. Now white plays h4, hoping for takes when the rook is opened up. Let me think about that a little bit. Again, I don't really want to open the rook up. There's nothing wrong with just castling. And then we can think about moves like these, kicking away the pieces. a5 is a nice move. Let's start with the move. There's f6, there's e5, there's c5, and h6. These are some of the moves I'm considering. Attacking, and we also have the move rook here, attacking this. I can't see whichever one's necessarily the best, so I'll just pick one that seems reasonable. And bishop f4, trying to trade the bishops. But unfortunately, if you notice the tactical pattern, This leads to a fork, and the game is over now. Here we can just simply retreat the knight. We could have also gone to c5 with the equivalent effect. Maybe c5 being slightly better, but it doesn't matter that much, as white is going to lose a piece and then lose the game. That was a short game. The opponent can play on, or they can resign here. If you're a beginner, you probably don't want to resign here. So knight d2, of course we take the bishop now, and as pawns look doubled, we can improve our rook's position by going rook e8, rook f d8, and follow it up knight to h5. So we want to win that pawn. We also have the move bishop c5. I want to win that pawn on f4, so I'm going directly for it. And we're also setting up a little trap here if the opponent falls into it, which is rook takes e2, king takes e2, and knight to g3, forking the king and the rook. So a little double purpose move here. And indeed, our opponent falls for that one. But if you notice here, now the rooks are connected. If I go rook takes, king takes, knight g3, king f2 takes, then I'm actually not winning a whole lot, but I get bishop takes f4 in the end. Check. Check is another move I could play. Then just knight f4. But in order to simplify, the move rook takes e2, king takes e2 is a very good combination by black. Not necessarily winning material, but just simplifying the game. And black is still piece up. And after bishop takes f4, taking another pawn, knight is hit. And we can continue controlling the open file with the move rook e8, thus controlling the position. And if the knight ever goes here, we have bishop e3, and we can fork the king and the knight. Rook here walks into a tactic, bishop to g3, distracting the king from the rook, and the game is over completely now. So after king takes bishop, our rook will take this rook, and the game is over now. Knight c5, not necessarily scary, because we can just dip our bishop back. And notice the bishop controls all the squares that the knight can go to. King to f4. But the king is cut off, so I'm not worried about any of this. Now we can just slowly walk our king to the center and get that knight out of the way. Knight d3, attacking our rook. One thing we can do is keep the rook, cutting off the king, while attacking all the pawns. And we still have the plan of bringing the king over. Now the opponent tries this, attacking the weak c6 pawn. but this is not dangerous. It can simply be blocked with bishop d7, defended, that is. And now we can play a5 because this knight is defending the pawn, but so we attack it. And once that knight moves, we can take the pawn, the winning position. And now the king is trying to go in. And what we can do is simply oppose it with our king. Here, the knight is attacking our bishop, which is defended. We also have the move f6 to get rid of that king here. After it goes here, we can consider moving the king in. But there's a million roads that lead to Rome here. One good move is just to push g5, creating potential passed pawn on the king side that can run and become a queen. And if the move h5 is played, the move bishop to e8 would target it. Here, we can take with the g-pawn because we're taking away, trying to get these pawns rolling down the board. But the drawback is it weakens the e5 square. And I'm going to finish off the game by pinning the knight to the king. And then I'm going to sacrifice my rook for the knight. And I'm going to follow it up with pushing my pawns down way deep into h3, forcing the king to defend. And then that frees up my king to do whatever it wants. My king is going to invade and potentially take these pawns here. So this is a concept of forcing a piece to do a defensive role. In this case, the king can really only hang out here, which frees up my king to go wherever it wants. And all my pawns are like this. And the game is going to end soon, because white has to concede space, allowing my king inside. And my king can take all these pawns, and the game is over. The only thing we have to be careful about is not to stalemate white. So b4, just be careful. Just be aware. Try not to stalemate white here. But I know white always has these squares, so I'm not too worried. So let's close out the game by promoting to a queen. Let's go queen c2 check. And queen f2 checkmate. GG. So that was a good game. e4, c5, bishop, c4. This is a bishop's opening. It's often played by beginners and intermediate level players against the Sicilian, because in another opening, the Italian game, they also play the bishop out to c4. So they figure that, hey, if I can do it in the Italian game, why can't I do it in the Sicilian? And the reason this is considered bad theoretically is because black can blunt the power of the bishop by going e6. And the long-term goal is d5, which attacks the bishop while building a nice black center. And that's why bishop c4 is considered not too sound. But I have seen some people play it like a3. I've seen this before. And the idea is, let's say knight c6, d3, and d5, and bishop a2 is played. White's idea in this sideline is to keep the bishop on a really annoying a2 square where it can't be targeted easily, and play this kind of like a hyper-modern opening where the bishop is sniping the center from afar. This is actually not terrible. It's kind of like white is trying to play black here, trying to play these moves like that and then put the bishop far away. So it's interesting in a blitz game, but in a classical game it's probably not that good. So that's not what happened in this game though. The opponent didn't use that idea. Instead they went d4 right away, another move that is slightly inaccurate because after takes and knight c6, I simply win a tempo on the queen, forcing the queen to move again. And as I like to say to beginners, try not to bring your queen out in the opening unless you have a specific reason for it, because the other side is going to maneuver their pieces to attack your queen. That queen's going to have to move a lot while the other person is just developing, attacking that queen. So queen e3, knight f6, continuing my normal development, and maybe the bishop will go here, like if knight c3, the bishop on f8 could in some cases develop to b4, or it can just go to e7, but this depends on the specific situation. And the other bishop here could either be fianchettoed, or also it could go d6 and bishop d7, again depending on the scenario. But in this case, my opponent played e5 right away, and this just blunders a pawn because whenever you're not castled, you have to look out for checks that could check your king and also fork and win material. So e5, big blunder by our opponent, losing this pawn after queen a5, c3, and queen takes e5. Now an equivalent move to queen a5 was the move knight g4, which also forks the queen and the pawn, but with a different mechanism. Not through check, but through attacking a piece of higher value. And then when the queen moves, say here, then you could take that, attacking the bishop, and the bishop would have to move again, etc. Again, perfectly good move, just as good as queen a5. So anyways, I chose queen a5, c3, and queen takes e5, but I could have just as easily done knight takes e5 and attacking the bishop, not trading queens. I believe this was equally as good. The engine says this is better, but I don't really see a clear preference personally. But perhaps by not trading queens, you keep an aggressive position, you can maybe harass that queen, as I said. Could be an idea like the bishop c5, you could go knight d5. Could be ideas like that, so maybe that's why it's better. Or even bishop d6, bishop f4 is an idea. So in any case, queen takes e5 is perfectly legitimate. After knight f3, I swap the queens and go d5, which is the other idea I mentioned at the beginning, why bishop c4 is bad. Because after e6, pairing d5, the bishop is going to be hit there. So I might as well not move it to a square where it's going to be hit eventually. So d5, bishop e5, and knight e5 is something that white wants to do at some point, or knight d4, taking advantage of that pin. So I go bishop d7 right away to block the pin. I could have also gone bishop d6, and if knight d4, then I can go bishop d7. That's fine too. But I went bishop d7, and I took, after After bishop d7, my opponent took, and I took with the pawn, which is a very valid way to play the position. I could have also taken with the bishop, with a slightly different kind of position. But I actually prefer taking with the pawn because it strengthens the center, and also the rook can use the b file. But if you take with the bishop, then, for example, white castles, bishop d6, h3, castles, let's just say knight d4, bishop is going to be hit, and I felt that that's okay. It's like still really good for black. Black is still up a pawn, but b takes c6 is what I personally like to play in these positions. But of course, you need to be flexible. There might be some situations in which taking with the bishop is better. And then my opponent plays knight d4. Again, I think that white can't really mess around here. Perhaps even castling is good. And remember, this is still kind of like an opening. You need to develop the pieces. So playing knight d4 is a little bit just slightly inaccurate once again. And here I go bishop to d6. But actually knight g4 was strongest, attacking the bishop, threatening to win the bishop pair fully. Well, I already have a bishop pair, but threatening to win the bishop, because after I go bishop d6, there's an idea knight b3, trying to go for that c5 square that's been weakened because the b pawn is no longer present. So I can go a5 and knight c5 and rook b8, b3. Then I can go knight g4, and if the bishop moves, I take that knight. So still good, but more accurate was knight g4 because of this idea to take knight b3 and c5. So anyways, not a big deal, and that's not what happened. The opponent played bishop g5. Here I played knight to e4, attacking the bishop. The bishop didn't go anywhere, sorry. It went h4. Here I castled, getting my king to safety and developing my rook. And after g3, I went h6. There are plenty of good moves there. For example, c5 was a move, e5 was a move, all good moves, so just pick one. h6. And then bishop f4 was the key blunder of the game, putting two pieces on forkable squares. Always check for forks. So bishop f4 was just losing a piece. Much better was something that didn't lose a piece. Bishop e3, and it's relatively simple blunder, bishop f4, e5, and the rest of the game is pretty straightforward. f3, counterattacking my knight. Here, knight f6 was what I played. Perfectly normal move. I could have also gone knight c5, going knight d3, maybe even better. Yeah, knight c5, probably the best move. But knight f6, perfectly okay too. And there's nothing wrong with it. And knight e2, and then I take. I think from that point, the rest of the game is less interesting. I go knight h5. After knight here, I decide to sack my rook for the knight, seeing that if the king takes, I go knight g3. So here I'm not really winning material, per se, but I'm just simplifying towards an endgame that's easier to win, because when you're up material and you have a better position, a lot of times it's easier if you trade pieces, because your advantage gets more apparent there. So the rest of the game is not super interesting. I execute the tactic, and I go bishop takes f4, attacking the knight, winning that weak pawn on f4. Knight b3, I go rook e8, setting a trap. If knight c5, then I have bishop b3. That's kind of why I played rook e8. And if knight e4, or knight d4, sorry, I could have also had the option of simplifying. and then driving the rook down here to win the game. So rook e8, kind of a tricky move, and rook e1, another blunder, because this king is protecting rook, so move bishop g3 forces the king away. And after that, I can just take the rook for free. Knight c5, bishop c8. The rest of the game is not super interesting, so I'll fast forward it. And really the idea g5, creating a passed pawn, is very strong. If h5, I can go bishop e8, winning that pawn. So that's my idea there. F takes, knight d3. And then another key move, rook to d2, pinning the knight to the king. And then after king e3, I sacrifice the rook for the knight. And while this is not strictly necessary, it just makes it easier for me to win, because in blitz, bullet, even rapid, knights are really tricky. So idea there to simplify the position, especially when you're winning. And here, one idea is to put the passed pawn on a square that's far advanced, which ties this king down to the defense. So this king has to hang out in this neighborhood, and meanwhile I can go with my king to attack all the other pawns, because this king can't do anything. It has to stay guarding this passed pawn, so that's how I win the rest of the game. Go here and I win the pawns, and that's it. I think the rest of the game is incredibly easy. Here, and queen f2 is mate. So good game to my opponent. Hope this really explained why bishop c4 is not a good move. All the way on move 2, because e6, d5 already hits that. Hope you enjoyed this game, and see you next time.